My goodness, a lot going on. I ate well for Easter, that's for sure. Honey baked ham, mashed potatoes. All the works. More stuff. Here's some ducks. Headless elephant. I feel bad for cutting off his head. Oh, look at this book I found. Woody Allen without feathers. Oh, The Doors live at the Hollywood Bowl. You can see that on YouTube. This was a gift of the Swiss Family Robinson. We were in hysterics on Saturday night because of the first line from the editor. When the publishers asked me to write an introduction for this new edition of one of the dearest old books in the world, I had to admit that I had never read it. We were in drunken hysterics over that. Because of an editor getting a job for something he had no experience with. And we got a love you dog. He needs a bath. Okay. And this spool of wire, I used to buy these $5 baling wire spools. I'd make these kind of sculptures with it. I miss that wire. Okay, sorry to waste 2 minutes of your time. I guess talking for a little bit before reading warms me up a little to read. And it's also my therapy. Let's see, glasses. Glasses. I just came up with a name for them, like the glasses of insight. Really does help to put these on. Ah, dang it. Memory. The date of writing this prose poem is unknown, but it probably dates to shortly before its appearance in the United Cooperative, June 1919. Like Polaris, it may also have been inspired by Poe's prose poems, especially the conversation of Eros and Charmion, which similarly tells of the destruction of all earth life. Poe's poem, The Valley of Unrest, refers to the valley Nice, a detail Lovecraft apparently picked up. In the valley of Nice, I'll just call it Nis. In the valley of Nis, the accursed waning moon shines thinly, tearing a path for its light with feeble horns through the lethal foliage of a great upas tree, and within the depths of the valley where the light reaches not, move forms not meet to be beheld. Rank is the herbage on each slope, where evil vines and creeping plants crawl amidst the stones of ruined palaces, twining tightly about broken columns and strange monoliths, and heaving up marble pavements laid by forgotten hands. And in trees that grow gigantic in crumbling courtyards leap little apes, while in and out of deep treasure vaults ripe poison, serpents, and scaly things without a name. Vast are the stones which sleep beneath coverlets of dank moss, and mighty were the walls from which they fell. For all time did their builders erect them, and in sooth they yet serve nobly. for beneath them the gray toad makes his habitation. At the very bottom of the valley lies the river Than, whose waters are slimy and filled with weeds. From hidden springs it rises, and to subterranean grottos it flows, so that the demon of the valley knows not why its waters are red, nor whither they are bound. The genie that haunts the moonbeams spake to the demon of the valley, saying, I am old and forget much. Tell me the deeds and aspect and name of them who built these things of stone. And the demon replied, I am memory, and am wise in lore of the past, but I too am old. These beings were like the waters of the river Than, not to be understood. Their deeds I recall not, for they were but of the moment. Their aspect I recall dimly, for it was like to that of the little apes in the trees. Their name I recall clearly, for it rhymed with that of the river. These beings of yesterday were called man. So the genie flew back to the thin horned moon, and the demon looked intently at a little ape in a tree that grew in a crumbling courtyard. Now we're on to Old Bugs, an extemporaneous sob story by Marcus Lollius, proconsul of Gaul. We looked up the word consulate. Basically, it's a representative of a government in a different land. This delightful comic tale was written specifically for Lovecraft's young friend Alfred Galpin, probably in the summer or early fall of 1919, as Galpin had expressed the desire to experience alcohol before Prohibition went into effect, July 4th, 1919. Several character names are taken from Galpin's acquaintances, including Eleanor Wing, a schoolmate at the Appleton, Wisconsin High School. Galpin notes that at the end of the story, Lovecraft has added the following note: Now will you be good? It was first published in The Shuttered Room and Other Pieces, 1959. Sheehan's Pool Room, which adorns one of the lesser alleys in the heart of Chicago's Stockyard District, is not a nice place. Its air, freighted with 1,000 odors, such as Coleridge may have found at Cologne, too seldom knows the purifying rays of the sun, but fights for space with the acrid fumes of unnumbered cheap cigars and cigarettes which dangle from the coarse lips of unnumbered human animals that haunt the place day and night. But the popularity of Sheehan's remains unimpaired, and for this there is a reason obvious to anyone who will take the trouble to analyze the mixed stenches prevailing there. Over and above the fumes and sickening closeness rises an aroma once familiar throughout the land, but now happily banished to the back streets of life by the edict of a benevolent government, the aroma of strong, wicked whiskey, a precious kind of forbidden fruit, indeed, in this year of grace, 1950. Sheehan's is the acknowledged center to Chicago's subterranean traffic in liquor and narcotics, and as such has a certain dignity which extends even to the unknown attaches of the place. But there was until lately one who lay outside the pale of that dignity, one who shared the squalor and filth, but not the importance of Sheehan's. He was called Old Bugs, and was the most disreputable object in a disreputable environment. What he had once been, many tried to guess, for his language and mode of utterance, when intoxicated to a certain degree, were such as to excite wonderment. but what he was presented less difficulty, for old Bugs, in superlative degree, epitomized the pathetic species known as the bum, or the down and outer. Whence he had come, no one could tell. One night he had burst wildly into Sheehan's, foaming at the mouth and screaming for whiskey and hashish, and having been supplied in exchange for a promise to perform odd jobs, had hung about ever since, mopping floors, cleaning cuspidors and glasses, and attending to 100 similar menial duties in exchange for the drink and drugs which were necessary to keep him alive and sane. He talked but little, and usually in the common jargon of the underworld, but occasionally, when inflamed by an unusually generous dose of crude whiskey, would burst forth into strings of incomprehensible polysyllables and snatches of sonorous prose and verse which led certain habitués, Habitu apostrophe es, to conjecture that he had seen better days. One steady patron, a bank defaulter under cover, came to converse with him quite regularly, and from the tone of his discourse ventured the opinion that he had been a writer or professor in his day. But the only tangible clue to old Bug's past was a faded photograph which he constantly carried with him, the photograph of a young woman of noble and beautiful features. This he would sometimes draw from his tattered pocket, carefully unwrapped from its covering of tissue paper, and gaze upon for hours with an expression of ineffable sadness and tenderness. It was not the portrait of one whom an underworld denizen would be likely to know, but of a lady of breeding and quality, garbed in the quaint attire of 30 years before. Old Bugs himself seemed also to belong to the past, for his nondescript clothing bore every hallmark of antiquity. He was a man of immense height, probably more than 6 feet, though his stooping shoulders sometimes belied this fact. His hair, a dirty white and falling out in patches, was never combed, and over his lean face grew a mangy stubble of coarse beard, which seemed always to remain at the bristling stage, never shaven, yet never long enough to form a respectable set of whiskers. His features had perhaps been noble once, but were now seamed with the ghastly effects of terrible dissipation. At one time, probably in middle life, he had evidently been grossly fat, but now he was horribly elan, the purple flesh hanging in loose pouches under his bleary eyes and upon his cheeks. Altogether, old Bugs was not pleasing to look upon. The disposition of old Bugs was as odd as his aspect. Ordinarily, he was true to the derelict type, ready to do anything for a nickel or a dose of whiskey or hashish, but at rare intervals he showed the traits which earned him his name. Then he would try to straighten up, and a certain fire would creep into the sunken eyes. His demeanor would assume an unwonted grace and even dignity, and the sodden creatures around him would sense something of superiority, something which made them less ready to give the usual kicks and cuffs to the poor butt and drudge. At these times he would show a sardonic humor and make remarks which the folk of Sheehan's deemed foolish and irrational, but the spells would soon pass, and once more old Bugs would resume his eternal floor scrubbing and cuspidor cleaning. But for one thing, old Bugs would have been an ideal slave to the establishment, and that one thing was his conduct when young men were introduced for their first drink. The old man would then rise from the floor in anger and excitement, muttering threats and warnings and seeking to dissuade the novices from embarking upon their course of seeing life as it is. He would sputter and fume, exploding into sesquipedalian admonitions and strange oaths, and animated by a frightful earnestness which brought a shudder to more than one drug-racked mind in the crowded room. But after a time his alcohol-enfeebled brain would wander from the subject, and with a foolish grin he would turn once more to his mop or cleaning rag. Alright, that's enough for today. Thank you.